Night shifts are supposed to be quiet. Empty hallways, dark streets, a world that feels like it's paused until the sun rises again. But sometimes, the night brings things you weren't meant to see. What if you heard footsteps when no one else was there? Saw something on the security cameras that shouldn't exist? Tonight, we bring you 3 terrifying true night shift horror stories, accounts from people who clocked in, but almost never clocked out. So turn down the lights, check your surroundings, and whatever you do, don't look behind you. Story 1, The Man Who Wasn't There. Gas stations are supposed to be safe. Bright lights, security cameras, constant surveillance. But what if someone, or something, shows up, and the cameras don't catch them? Let's start the story. Jason had worked the night shift at a gas station just off a lonely stretch of highway for almost a year. It was always the same routine. Clock in at 10 p.m., stock shelves, sip bad coffee, and wait for morning. Most nights were quiet, just the occasional trucker or late-night traveler stopping in for gas. But one night, someone came in who shouldn't have been there. It started at exactly 2:14 a.m. Jason was leaning on the counter, scrolling through his phone, when he heard the soft chime of the door opening. He looked up. A man had walked in. He was tall, unnaturally thin, and dressed in a faded gray hoodie. His face was shadowed by the hood, but Jason could see enough to tell that something was off. The man didn't acknowledge him. He walked slowly to the back of the store, past the shelves, straight toward the drinks cooler. Jason felt a chill. There was something too smooth about the way the man moved, like he was gliding instead of walking. Still, Jason tried to shake it off. Maybe he was just tired. Maybe this was just another traveler passing through. But then he noticed something that made his blood run cold. The security monitor, the one that displayed a live feed of the store's cameras, wasn't showing the man. Jason's eyes darted from the screen to the back of the store. The man was right there. He could see him, clear as day. But on the monitor? Nothing, just empty aisles. A deep instinctive fear took over. He wasn't alone in the store, but was he? Jason swallowed hard, trying to stay calm. You need any help finding something?" he called out. The man froze. For several agonizing seconds, he didn't move. Then slowly he turned his head toward Jason. And that's when Jason saw his face. Or rather, the lack of one. The man's face was completely blank. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just smooth, pale skin stretching from ear to ear. Jason's breath caught in his throat. Every instinct screamed at him to run. But before he could move, the man vanished. 1 second he was there, next the store was empty. The door hadn't chimed. Nothing had moved. It was as if he had never been there at all. Jason spun toward the monitor again. The screen was still showing an empty store, but this time, the security camera in the back was facing him, and in the reflection on the cooler's glass door, there he was, standing inches behind Jason. A breath not his own brushed the back of his neck. The lights flickered, and Jason ran. He bolted through the emergency exit, not stopping until he was halfway across the parking lot. When he finally turned back, gasping for air, the gas station looked normal, quiet, empty. The next morning, he quit his job. Later, he found out something that made his stomach turn 2 years before. A man had been killed in that very gas station, shot in the back of the head during a robbery. The security cameras had caught everything, except for the killer. Jason never set foot in that gas station again. But sometimes he wonders, did he see a ghost? Or something much, much worse? And the scariest part? If Jason had been looking at the real-time feed the whole time, then why was the man only visible in the reflection? Have you ever seen something in a mirror that wasn't supposed to be there? If so, maybe it was watching you too. Story 2. The hospital basement. Hospitals are supposed to be places of healing, but late at night when the halls are empty and the lights flicky, they can feel like something else entirely. Something watching, something waiting. Let's start the story. Mia had always wanted to be a nurse. She loved helping people, loved the rush of the ER, loved knowing she made a difference. But she hated the night shift. The hospital was different at night. The constant noise of the day faded into an eerie silence. The fluorescent lights buzzed, flickering just enough to make shadows dance in the corner, and the long, empty hallways felt too empty. Her least favorite part? The supply room. It was in the basement. A long, windowless corridor led to a heavy steel door. Inside was nothing but shelves of medical supplies and a single flickering light. She always felt watched down there, like something was just around the corner. That night, at exactly 2:37 a.m., she got a call from the ICU. They needed more saline bags. Mia groaned. That meant a trip downstairs. She grabbed her key card, took a deep breath, and made her way to the basement elevator. The hospital was nearly silent, except for the occasional beeping monitor from a distant room. The doors slid open. She stepped inside. As the elevator descended, the air grew noticeably colder. Mia shivered, rubbing her arms. When the doors opened, the hallway was darker than usual. The single flickering light at the end barely illuminated the heavy steel door. Something felt wrong. Her footsteps echoed as she walked, her heart pounding faster with each step. She swiped her keycard, pulled the door open, and stopped cold. The shelves had been knocked over. Supplies scattered across the floor, and in the middle of the mess, a wheelchair sat facing the doorway, empty. It hadn't been there before. Mia hesitated. Had someone been down here? Had something else? Swallowing hard, she stepped inside, careful to avoid the mess. She hurried toward the saline bags, grabbing what she needed. Then she heard it, a whisper, soft, coming from the corner of the room. Mia's stomach clenched. She wasn't alone. She turned slowly. Nothing. Just the overturned shelves and that damn wheelchair. She moved quickly, stuffing the saline bags into her cart, her breath shaky. Then, as she turned back toward the door, the wheelchair moved, just an inch, just enough to make a small creaking sound. Mia's breath caught in her throat, her body screamed at her to run. Then, the light flickered, and for half a second, in the darkness, someone was sitting in the wheelchair. A frail figure, pale, thin, hospital gown hanging off its bony shoulders. No eyes, just hollow sockets staring right at her. The light flickered again. Gone! Mia bolted. She didn't care about the supplies. She sprinted out of the room, slammed the steel door shut, and ran for the elevator. She jabbed the button, her fingers shaking, heart hammering in her chest. The elevator doors finally slid open, and inside, a wheelchair. Facing her, empty. Mia turned and ran up the stairs, never looking back. The next day, she refused to go back down there. But she asked a coworker about the basement, and what she heard made her blood run cold. Years ago, the hospital had housed terminal patients in the basement when the ICU was full. One elderly woman had been forgotten down there. Staff had assumed she had been moved, but she hadn't. She had died alone in her wheelchair, and now she waits. Mia never worked another night shift again. Hospitals are full of life, but sometimes they don't let go of the dead. If you ever find yourself alone in a hospital at night and you see a wheelchair where it shouldn't be, don't get too close, because someone might still be sitting in it. Story 3, the factory that never sleeps. Factories shut down at night. Machines stop, workers leave, the place becomes still. But what if something else keeps working in the dark? And what if it notices you? Let's start the story. Eric had been a night shift security guard at a massive abandoned factory for 2 years. The place used to be a steel mill back in the 1980s, but after an accident that killed 7 workers, it shut down permanently. His job was simple: walk the perimeter, check the security monitors, and make sure no one broke in. But after a while, Eric realized something unsettling. No one ever tried to break in. Instead, something inside wanted out. It started with the cameras. Each night, Eric sat in the security room, staring at a wall of fuzzy black and white monitors. Most of them showed nothing but dark, empty hallways and dust-covered machines. But sometimes, the feeds would glitch. One camera, deep in the factory, would show movement, a shadow, a shape darting between machines. At first, Eric thought it was just rats, maybe a stray cat. But then, one night, he saw it clearly. At exactly 3:12 a.m., the motion detector tripped in Sector 4, the old assembly line. Eric switched the monitor to that feed, and there it was. A figure, tall, thin, moving with an unnatural smoothness. It stood between two rusted machines, completely motionless. Eric leaned closer. The figure was human-shaped, but wrong. Too long, too thin, and it had no face, just a smooth, blank surface where its eyes should be. Eric's stomach turned. Then the thing twitched. Not like a person moving, but like a glitch on a screen, a sudden, jerky distortion. And then, in the span of a second, it turned its head. It was looking right at the camera. Eric's breath hitched. Then, before he could react, the feed cut to static. His hands shook as he reached for the radio. "Control, we have possible trespassers in Sector 4.4, requesting backup, no response." Eric swallowed hard. He had two choices, stay in the security room or check it out himself. Every part of his body told him to stay, but his job told him otherwise. So he grabbed his flashlight, his baton, and headed into the factory. The air inside was thick with dust. His boots echoed against the concrete floor as he walked down the long, empty corridors. Everything was silent. Then, a sound. A metallic clinking from deeper inside. Eric's pulse quickened. He gripped his flashlight and stepped forward, rounding the corner into Sector 4. The old machines stood like rusting skeletons in the dim light. Dust swirled in the beam of his flashlight. And then, something moved. His flashlight landed on a figure at the far end of the room, standing perfectly still. It was the same thing from the cameras. Tall, too thin, faceless. Eric's breath caught in his throat. Then, it twitched. A horrible jerking motion like it was being fast forward. And then, in one unnatural lunge, it was closer. Too close. Eric staggered back. It didn't move like a person. It moved like a broken recording, skipping forward in sharp, jarring cuts. Then, the radio on his belt crackled. A voice, barely a whisper, hissed through the static. "You shouldn't be here." Eric turned and ran. He sprinted down the corridor, heart hammering. The air felt heavy. The factory walls seemed to close in around him. He reached the security room and slammed the door shut. The monitors flickered. Static. Then, one camera switched back on. It showed the hallway outside the security room. Eric's stomach dropped, because standing just outside the door was the figure, still, motionless, waiting. Then, the feed cut out. Silence. Eric didn't move, didn't breathe. He gripped his baton like it would do something, like it could protect him from whatever the hell this was. Minutes passed. Then, slowly, he reached for the doorknob. He counted to 3, then flung the door open. Nothing, the hallway was empty, but on the floor was a footprint. Not a boot print, not a shoe print, a bare human-shaped footprint, twisted and elongated. Eric didn't wait to see if it would come back. He quit that night. A week later, the factory was condemned, demolished. But sometimes, when Eric drives past the empty lot where it once stood, he swears he sees someone standing there. Tall, too thin, watching, waiting. Factories shut down for the night, but some machines never stop. And if you ever find yourself alone in a dark, empty building, make sure you're really alone, because something might still be working. Night shifts can be eerie, but for these people, they weren't just eerie, they were a nightmare. Have you ever experienced something terrifying while working late? If so, you might not have been alone.